Ladies and gentlemen, I am truly and sincerely grateful, not formally. I am not a formal person. I am grateful for the opportunity given me today to speak about one of the most astounding, most fascinating, most world-shaking phenomena that human history has ever witnessed, the Renaissance. History has many ups and downs, all history. This cosmos has its history, our sun has its history, the earth, life, man's evolution, life, and other phenomena have their history. Everything in this world has got a history. What is the meaning of history? The meaning of history is that all things present in this universe at one time were not in existence. Excepting, of course, the ultimate question about the entire cosmos, entire universe. Those questions are not the part of the subject today. But all other things were at one time not there, then they came into being. Then they produced something else from them, grew old, passed away, and will do so in future also. This applies everything in the entire universe. Nothing is free of it. This is something absolute, relatively absolute. So with regard to this earth, there is the law of uneven development. In all social and other phenomena, the development is not even. Things don't all go together. It's not the case that when something walks, then all the others also walk. No. Some things are contracting, some things are expanding. With regard to life on earth, the first great breakthrough on this earth was that man coming into existence of Homo sapiens, the man. And that thing occurred in Africa, not in Europe, not in Asia, not in America. The most backward and dark continent is known to be the cradle of man. Prior to that, man was not a man. Man became a man in Africa. There are many interesting points in the life of man. The first great migration of hominids was, in the ice ages, his coming down from the trees. When he was not a man yet. The most important, most difficult sojourn and journey that he had to make was to come down from the trees. In the trees he was safe. Trees were his habitat, protection, his familiar place. But when he came down, there were lions, there were ferocious animals, so he became exposed. Our great ancestors have had to go through this terrible, absolutely terrible moment in their life. So the next important point was when man had to migrate from Africa to the other continents, where he was not familiar with the climate. The third big stride that man has to make was to go into the deep sea. Going along the small rivers was quite all right, Nile, Indus and the rest of it. And going through the coast, where there was not much danger, that was perfectly all right. But going into the deep sea, that was the third big, terrible, frightening step in the evolution of man. After that, the first civilization that we had was on the banks of the rivers, Nile, Indus, and in Iraq. But the first human settlement is supposed to have been in Iraq, Mesopotamia. Iraq has the special distinction of having the first city on earth, known city, first civilization. Then there were many civilizations. There are supposed to be many wonders of the world, including Taj Mahal. There's a long list. But the greatest cultural wonder of the world that is yet surpassed in entire human history, that defies and challenges human imagination, that you can't explain. Even giants like Karl Marx and angels were the greatest giants the world has ever seen in their times. They were unable to offer any explanation, excepting only to wonder. And that phenomena is the Greco-Roman civilization, beginning from 700 and 800 BC up to 307 or so. During this period of over 1,000 years, a civilization combined now is called Greco-Roman civilization, and then subsequently the Judeo-Christian culture was also superimposed upon it. It was not part of it. It was not an integral part of it, but because of the geographical and historical conditions, Judeo-Christian religious culture was superimposed upon it. So it's called today, the Western civilization is considered to be founded on the foundations of Judeo-Christian and Greco-Roman civilization. Culturally speaking, what is culture? Culture means anything that deals with human thought, mostly the product of human mind, and above that human imagination. Music, architecture, education, films, poetry, literature, philosophy, even up to point science, technology, that will come under the description of culture. Culturally speaking, that phenomena remains unsurpassed today. Culturally speaking, the world has been divided into roughly 8 periods. The first period, in the modern sense, is that of antiquity. That is the classical period of Greco-Roman literature, art and culture. That is the first period. It's called the period of antiquity. The next period is called Middle Ages. The succeeding period is our period today, which is subject of our talk today, and that is Renaissance, which means rebirth. And thereafter we have Reformation. We are talking only of Europe. Of course, everything in this world is interconnected, interdependent, interactive, and what's more important, interpenetrating. One thing is inside other. There is a universal validity around this thing, that all the things by many systems are interpenetrating, interdependent, interactive. So they have an influence upon themselves. But then there was Reformation, that is to say, European Reformation. There were many other reformations also. European reformations, beginning with Luther, was excommunicated in 1521 in the 16th century, beginning of it. Then period covers the religious wars, Huguenots, Catholics, Protestants, Protestant League, all that. Then we have Enlightenment. That is a further extension of Renaissance. And then we have scientific revolution and modernity, which fairly encompasses many things, but essentially, socially speaking, it means the capitalist, the emergence and the domination of the socialist mode of socio-economic mode of production. Essence of would be that. In flippant, superficial language, we can describe it in 1,000 ways, but the essence of the whole thing phenomena is that capitalism superseded feudalism in Europe and ultimately went forward to become an imperialism and then conquer the entire world. But the conquest of the entire world was laid down in the 16th century during the period of the Renaissance. So Renaissance is the root of all the phenomena that you find today. Had the small period of Renaissance not been there, the history of the world would not have been the same that we have today. Had that worst period in human history. It is called era is called Dark Ages. Now it's called Middle Ages. That is a euphemistic term. When you want to speak about something which is lovely and it is not very charming, then you try to speak about it in a very sophisticated way. So this is sophisticated language, Middle Ages. But it was called Dark Ages. There is one sentence of Toynbee. The Arabs kept the lantern of knowledge burning during the darkest centuries of Europe. So that was the time when even the European scholars had to call that period of 1,000 years as the darkest time, human history has ever seen. Today, we are faced with a very difficult situation. Most of us are desperate. We won't find any way out. Not being familiar with even our own history, we will not go know how this thing has come and what's going to happen. We are not aware whether our people have come across any such tribulation in the past or not. So we are just at one point of time without any past, without any present and without any future. If we knew more about our history and the world history, we would find that virtually every people, every group of men and individuals and nationalities and states and civilizations have had to go through challenges, the success or failure of which would mean death, destruction or survival and further emancipation. We are today talking about a story, not of a people, not of a class or a nation, not even about an empire. We are talking about a whole continent. And the life and death struggle of a whole continent which lost its way, which came under the darkness, shadow of darkness, which did not know where to go, which was completely put there as if it was not there. It was something like a stone. It has been turned into stone. How did that entire continent, the continent of Europe, emerge from 1,000 years? The darkness continued for 1,000 years, or even more. If we come from 307, the fall of Rome, then alone will be there. We'll come to the 14th century. But it went up to the 15th century, this Middle Ages went on. And if we come to the Counter-Reformation, then it went on in spite, because the two systems continued. The efforts for Renaissance were going on, and the counterblast to Renaissance was also going on. In the world, there is a coexistence of many things, including systems. Today you have many socio-economic systems going on sometime in this world. There is slavery, still slavery. Do you agree with me that this slavery is still there? Slavery. Women are slaves in our country, in the upper most of the places. In Saudi Arabia, you go to the various places, slavery is very much there. Then feudal system is also there. Tribal system is also there. Tolls and frontiers are already there. In Manila, you will find, I have been to Manila and many countries, you will find those people who are primitive people, who still want to take their small spears and live by killing things and rats. They even kill rats, aboriginal people. So many systems, socio-economic formations coexist. So that dark night of 1,000 years was there. No way out was there. No commander came out, no general emancipated people, no political leader was there, no pope tackled the matter. There was absolutely nobody, as we have today, nobody. At that time, there was nobody. But still, a gigantic, world-historic, earth-shaking movement began and collected, and it wiped out the darkness of centuries, 1,000 years, and built up their continent to a level where from it has not gone down even today. Now it's reaching the whole world. The foundations of that period were first laid during the Greco-Roman period and then during this rebirth. The story today that I would like to tell you about, or refer to, would be the story of the rebirth of a continent. Not of one country, not of one civilization, but of an entire continent. Through most unorthodox means, unusual means, unheard of means. The emancipator of the entire continent, as I told you, were not the religious leaders, not the demigods, not the generals, but people like you and me, ordinary people, with pens in their hands, pens and papers, that's all. This was their weapon that they used against all the fascist and reactionary and condemnatory forces, the filth of the earth that was there at the time. They shattered it to pieces. How did they do it? Firstly, let us go back to the Greco-Roman times. Greco-Roman civilization was a slave-holder civilization. Unfortunately, precision is not the strong point of Sindhis in general, but it is not even the strong point of the East. East likes to have hyperbole, exaggeration. We can't say I am at your service. This is the style of the East because of the great civilizations and empires where man was nothing. Because of the gigantic stage on which politics was being held, because of the mammoth empires that was there, the like of which Europe has never seen. Huge empires, unlimited powers. Therefore man became so small that he simply did not have any existence. Karl Marx has given an explanation for what is so, but that we will talk about some next time. Greco-Roman civilization was a wonderful civilization because it was a very small civilization. They were not very rich people, and they were not very progressive people. They believed in slavery. Their best minds, like Aristotle, about whom Ibn Rushd has said, no mother during all the past centuries has given birth to a child named Aristotle, nor will any other mother possibly give birth to the like of him. That man also believed that the place of woman is in the house. That man considered that slavery was a normal state of affairs. Not because he was wicked, or he was bad, or he was evil, or he fell short of his ideals. No. A man is always a prisoner of the baggage, intellectual, ideological, and cultural baggage that is left to him by the preceding generations. You can't build upon nothing. We are all prisoners of the past. There is a legacy that is positive. There is a legacy that is negative. We have some fine, excellent things, these towns. I have not built this house. Many people have not built this Hyderabad. You today who are enjoying things in Hyderabad have not built these houses. Most of them not, these roads. That is our legacy. Every new generation creates something new and leaves it for the coming generations. They have said, I read this other day, somebody was complaining that his children were not being careful about their parents. He said, children are supposed to care for not for their parents, but for their children. That is the law of nature. Children's loyalty should be to their children, not to your children. So, every generation that comes leaves something for the coming generation. Only. But that past generations leave something evil also. Not because they want to do so, but because they are the prisoner of the past. Prisoners of the days when they were living in animals and like animals. Their ideas, their minds, suddenly you will find somebody, a very nice man, gentleman-like man, in a moment he will be transformed into a beast. Have you seen the phenomenon? Suddenly, without any provocation, the man will look at the face. And they have explained, the psychologists have explained, that at that time he has a relapse of centuries, of the times when he was living among the brutes, the jungle. He had, because of the heredity in him. In each of us there is a heredity. Their heredity is not the conclusion point. It will be changed, it will be affected, it will be in any way, it will be in a way modified. But it is there. So that heredity, that legacy is there. Second thing, there are very few people who can go beyond the best ideas of their times. I wish you to note this point. There are very rare cases where the people can cross the limits of the best, the noblest ideas of their times. Once it's known that the noblest ideas of this time are these and not beyond them, then 99% stop there. Actually, after 50 years, those noblest ideas will come out of date. But very few people have a farsightedness, the courage, the guts, to go beyond that limit which is artificially imposed on the mind, because there are certain chains, unseen chains in the minds of all people, all of us. Don't go, don't do that. No, what will people say? What will people say? Nowadays, after 10 years, that which was the thought that the people will come calling upon you, then that has become outdated and there's nothing, no objection to it. But that is the phenomenon. So, Aristotle, in some respects, the Greeks, in some respects, they are giants. In other respects, they are pygmies like their fellow citizens. They say the same things that others said. In our time also, we, all of us, you look into yourself also. Ladies and gentlemen, put questions on your mind. Are you not copying the bygone generations? They also said, but he got ठीक है, बना ही कहाँ जाती है संस्कृति का, ये got बर्दाश्त कर दिया, क्या हद है? Amiran, Kabiran, how can you talk to these people? DC Saab, how can you talk? Is this the way? But for the buttons. But nowadays, we, the sons and girls of very poor people and Sapedars and Patwaris, we said, Your Honor, my Lord, you don't have any jurisdiction whatsoever. Every day I tell judges, you don't have a jurisdiction. Chief Justice, I said, my Lord, you don't have a jurisdiction. How can you do it? The law doesn't permit you to do it. Nobody minds it. So in those days, this said and did things which remain fresh and which have not been surpassed in millenniums. The age of some thoughts is days and weeks and months and years. The intellectual age of some people goes beyond centuries and millennia. They live. Their ideas remain as fresh as ever. Their ideas remain as bold, as fascinating, as enchanting, as lovely, as useful as ever. On the contrary, there are certain ideas which grow in their splendor, their magnificence, their beauty and their charm as the time passes, because only then, with the passage of time, people are in a position to have that mind frame where they can appreciate those things. For instance, in the case of Charles Thief, how many people appreciated him as a poet? His own times were incapable intellectually of understanding the kind of person he was. This is the tragedy of all these men, that they can never be appreciated in own time. Not because their people are wicked, not because people are bad, not because they are dishonest, because their time frame is too little. Their capacity to understand and appreciate things in perspective is so small that they can't understand those things. The Greeks went into philosophy. They measured by mere speculation, They arrived at conclusions which were proved by science after many, many centuries. Scientists were able to prove their speculations after spending time their whole lives and calculating this time how much from distance from sun to the earth and mountains and things. And when they came to the conclusion, they said the Greeks were nearly correct, all correct. The chemistry, Alexandrian schools, and science, philosophy, poetry from Homer on, drama. It's unbelievable. It is something fantastic. The grandeur of the achievements of these people is something which creates awe. From the point of Jamaliyat, that is from the point of view of science of ethics, aesthetics, one of the qualities of aesthetical thing, of real beauty, is that when you look at it, you are overawed. You're completely overpowered, your senses refuse to accept your mind, and they refuse to use their intellect. They merely sit, look at things and wonder. The quality, the capacity to wonder is given to very few people. Only children have that capacity. Many people, unfortunately, they lose the faculty of wondering and being overawed. They become too petty, they protect themselves, they cannot be frank, they cannot say, Allah, Kamal. Don't say that, don't say that thing not to be said. Don't wonder. So people, nations and civilizations lose the capacity to wonder at things, to gape at things, to be overwhelmed and swept off of their feet. And that is not only a question of tribute, but that's a question of the depth of understanding. So generations will have to come to understand the part of the force of the grandeur, of the beauty, the architecture, the drama, the poetry, the thoughts, the speculations of the Greeks. And then the administrations of the Romans, the law-abiding nature of the man. One of the greatest gifts that Rome has given to Western Europe, and which has saved them, and which has throughout the centuries, which is one of the basic and fundamental source of strength to the Europeans, is the distinction between the rule of men and the rule of laws. In the Orient, in Japan, in China, in India, in Sindh, and everywhere, there are rules. Mir and hukumat hai, Prana hukumat hai. There, in the worst of times, if you have gone to the history of Europe, Henry VIII wanted to murder his wife so that he may marry another woman. And that woman whom he wanted to murder, his queen, happened to be the mother of another great queen, the Queen Elizabeth I. And Boleyn he wanted to murder. But he could not murder his wife. The King of England did not have the authority to dispose of his wife or even to divorce her. Because of the Roman tasya, तेरा चालिया न चालिए जरूर पसंद पी है जो केड़ी तात बकरिए मथे पन पी है and tasya dei tabake kayam tan tamam tasya diyan to bear pain. In our place also, in Shalate used to do it. They used to have pain to achieve piety, to become good people in the eyes of God. Tasya diyan taklif karan khunya undotyan bukhun katan faka katan kharke de roz rakhan. This is the tradition from those times. You have to suffer and go to the other world. All the books, all the knowledge was about the other world. Man was bad. He was a sinner. Man was not something to be talked of. Happiness was forbidden. A sinner should not be happy. It was a sin. Even to marry was a sin. Good men should not marry. All the girls of the royal families, most of them were in the nuns. They should never marry because it will mean player. The basic and fundamental principle of Christendom was don't be happy. Don't be comfortable. And everybody must be made uncomfortable to the best. And it was their claim that all that is there in this world is written on our books. So if you say anything, you must justify it from the books, from the dogma. You have to find him. Baba, he has also said, yeah, you can take kitab nahi chala. Where is it? Show it to us. If this is not there, then it's nonsense. Then they were burned in the stakes. Burning was a normal procedure for punishing people. Most of the prime ministers who were holy cardinals were burnt at the stake. Elizabeth burned quite some of them. Elizabeth the Great was a very decent chap. She also burned many people. And Mary, of course, burned most of them. And that was in England, which was supposed to be a most forward-looking country. In other places, they even asked from animals. They said there is a spirit within them. So if they don't do like this, but they do, there means some witches there. It was officially allowed to burn the witches. If a lady was unfortunately not very beautiful and she was very old, then they said she's a witch. And there is somewhere a sentence, somewhere which says burn the witches. Up to 1883, we find a case in Pennsylvania where an old lady was burned to the stake because they said she's a witch. There's a film about it also, Crucible. You should see it, about the witches. All of you must see the Crucible. In some respects, Christian religion is very backward. Absolutely. Many religions have their own particular aspects, but everything has a particular weakness. Their weakness is this. So what can you expect from such a society? It was completely a darkness. Nothing. Reading was not there. They said only Plato should be studied, and Plato has said something which should be made in accordance with Bible. It was a rule of barbarism. They went beyond barbarism. There was nothing here on this earth to protect anybody. It was a Christendom. From Newfoundland to the whole thing, everything was in the grip of the monasteries, of these things. Then we have subsequently Loyola and the Inquisitors. And we have the Great Inquisition, where Muslims were burned alive, thousands of them, in Spain, and Christians in the Counter-Reformation. Is one of the bloodiest, most unholiest chapters of human history, from which coming generations should learn. Europe went down, agriculture went down, roads were not there. They are talking only about Bible, 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 Bible. Angels are coming, angels are going, penance is there, you are forgiven, you are not forgiven. He is a sinner, he is not a sinner. Talking all the time about the next world. In many Christian monasteries, many old books of the Greco-Roman civilizations were preserved and translated, many of them. Around the 7th century, Justinian expelled the philosophers from Constantinople, from the Eastern Roman Empire. They came to Iran. Jamshid Nusarwan gave them protection, because Rome and Iran were at Dagas drawn, gave them protection. After quite a while, there were translations in the Pahlavi language. Pahlavi means Parthian. Parthians were the equals of Romans in the matter of battle. They are getting the parting shot of the Parthians. They are famous. They will run away. While running, they will shoot at you with their spears, and that is most dangerous. It's called a Parthian shot. You think that they are running away. They were in fact go run, and suddenly they will shoot behind you. So those people were really in the battlefield, they are equal to them. Those families and translations were there. Then in the days of Mansur, the second Khalifa of the Abbasids, Baghdad was constructed, and those people came there. Darul Hikmat was constructed there, and those books were translated, some rightly, some not rightly. There were many mistakes here and there, because some books which were not written by Aristotle were thought to be written by Aristotle. Many books by Polybius written were considered to be those of things. There were many mistakes. In any case, but Plato, which suited the religious people, was very much translated. And therefore, we have the first philosopher, Arab philosopher in Islamic history, Al-Kindi. Then you have Faryabi. The rest of them were all non-Arabs. So, the first revival of the Greco-Roman civilization did not take place in Europe. The revival in Europe took place in the beginning of the 15th century. The revival in the Middle East took place in the 10th century, even earlier than that. So therefore, when we had, I'm not talking about Muslims being better than other people or that, no, but this is the fact, what is there. I have got encyclopedias, things, books here. Therefore, the first giants, after the Greeks and the Romans, were produced not by Europe, but by Baghdad, and more by Spain and Northern Africa. Buwali Sina, Ar-Razi, Fakhruddin as well as the other Razi, Faryabi, Khayyam. You can't find a poet like Khayyam anywhere. You can't dare to say the kind of things that he said. Nobody could dare. He is unparalleled because of that, because the mullahs would have killed him. Isai mullahs would have killed him. He was the man who got away with everything that he said. Because by that time, the new and fresh ideas had come here. Therefore the gigantic personalities came. You cannot understand. Sindhi people are very unfortunate. They never read that first production of the breath of fresh wind in these dark continents. Asia also was by that time a dark continent. That fresh wind that came from the 8th century on, which went up to the 12th century and 13th century up to 18, in spite of all positions. So nobody knows about Rumi, Khayyam, Hafiz, Abul Khair. Abul Khair, there's one poem by Abul Khair, I remember only one line. You ask me, what should I bring for you, my beloved? The second line in Persian says, Be dard maya, digar har se ari khubas. Dard ka sawai naach jaye, ehsaas ka sawai naach jaye, ye jo ki bani choti hai. Dard zarur khani hai. He was the first poet, mystic poet, that was influenced. Then Muslims went beyond Europe. Europe up to this time, in so far as poetry is concerned, they are far in advance of them. Even Keats is very small. Keats, Shelley, they are very mythological, they don't have the words, they don't have the phraseology. As you know, Japanese language does not have a single epoch, because they say that Japanese language is not capable. It doesn't have the vocabulary which is required for a great epoch, like Ferdowsi. These languages have their own limitations. You see, the greatest poems of Japanese are haiku, 3 lines. Even so in China, you don't have long poems, because that language is not capable of powerful language, as the Arabic or the Persian, other languages are. Sanskrit, up to a point, Sanskrit cannot go beyond love poems and natural poems. Epic, yes, but love poem and natural poems, that Sanskrit cannot be based by anybody. So that our people had not studied. But that is there. The first Renaissance was in our side, Central Asia. Baghdad, Qartaba, Tehran, these Babara or Nahr, Samarkand, all this, the middle portions, and even that came to us. Why is the poetry of Shah Latif such as it is? Because it was affected, came directly from Hafiz and Rumi, which were the people who were the first beneficiaries, among the first beneficiaries of the breath of fresh wind, the first Renaissance that the world has ever seen. Renaissance means first new birth, the birth of freedom, the right to be happy, the right to love, the right to appreciate, right to live prayer. In the Christendom, you have no right to see the flowers and see that is a beautiful thing. You should be afraid of God. What are you talking? How can it be? Praise God. Look at the storms. Have your foot down. And what does Hafiz Shirazi say? Saram. But dunya ukba farunami ayat. Tabarakallah zi fitnaha ke dar saram daran. All praise be to God, that He has kept so many mischiefs in my mind and fitnas in my mind, that let alone the players of this world, but it does not bow down even for the sake of the players of the next world. Thank God. My head will not come down. This is Hafiz, Shiraz. If you read our poets, I mean these poets, not our poets, in the East you can't find this kind of poetry. Not in China, not in Japan, not in India. Because of the influence of that freedom, things that came from them. But this process went on for 3-4 centuries. There was a translation in 9th and 10th centuries, most of the translations were done. Then they were adapted in the 10th and 11th centuries, they were adapted. Babaji Sharif Mujib Sayyidnae, he Farang Masindo Mullah Lithawa, they compelled them to adapt. He hadith Farang Mutabaka Jita, you must have heard Shalati Moji, he Sitta Dikae, Sa Bibi Zulekha jo Zakrati Kare. Asani din mein, the people used to say, Farang Joka Sitta hai, Sa Ruhani Raj Karwa. This Ruhani Raj comes from the Christendom. Every line that you must read must be shown as coming from Christianity and from Bible. Every purpose must be of this angel or this God or this demigod or Christ and this and this. You cannot have a love poem at all. One of the praises that I found about Petrarch, the greatest, the Renaissance man, the world's first that he has been sent, another was Erasmus. About him, they gave him praise, and I was surprised at this kind of a compliment given to him. Will you believe this kind of a compliment? That he made secular poetry accepted as a noble and a serious poetry, worth saying and worth reading. Do you understand the meaning of this? All during 1,000 years, secular poetry without God and angels and everything, that was not to be done. It was something bad in manners. It was not a serious thing. It was poetry, secular poetry that was not there, but non-religious poetry was not allowed. That was that, simply that. You will have one of the most beautiful religious poets in English is Donne, whose famous words are, for whom the bell tolls. Don't say for whom the bells. He is of course in his own imitable way. He is really a wonderful poet. You who are the students of English poetry must read that man. And you want to have freshness of rustic type, then you must, Robert Burns is another kind of man. He surpasses many. This Donne and Robert Burns needs to be properly appreciated. In the 12th century, due to the economic causes, the center of economic gravity went from the eastern Mediterranean to western Europe. Italy became a province and country of small towns. Italy was the first urban country in the world. The majority of the activity of Italy was in towns as against the rest of Europe and the rest of the world. There some people from the ministries, by accident as it happens, saw the old books. They read them. Then a system came forth. And then in the between, Spain was conquered. Muslims were evacuated, and the libraries in Seville, Cordoba, and the libraries in the finest cities were taken over, and those libraries were full of Arabic translations of Greek literature. They translated them back in Hebrew and Latin. That started a regular avalanche of new knowledge, new learning. The greatest man, two great men of the Renaissance, one is Petrarch, Petrarch. Petrarch was a priest. Most of the rebellions had been done by priests because there were no other persons were available. And they were devout Catholics. That man, along with two other men, Boccaccio, he is the first great Renaissance writer who has written the stories. You must read them. They are not better than our stories from India, because India excels all of them. Nobody can meet the level and the standard of Alif Laila or the standards of the Panchtantra in East. There are many stories of Sanskrit language. They are simply marvelous. But then, judging by the Renaissance standards of Europe, Boccaccio is marvelous, though he is bringing it. There were two great men. Another was Salutati. He was also a very great man. Then from this it went to the north, and in the north we have Erasmus. He was also a priest. He also believed in Catholicism. But they wanted reform. They said reform is not inconsistent with religion. All the first people, beginning with Petrarch, thought that religion and Renaissance can go together. But ultimately, their ways parted. Many books were discovered. People at that time were tired of Christendom, were tired of the popes. They have been corrupt. They are not wanted. So ultimately, this man was taken to Rome. He was crowned. The laurels were crowned to him. He was crowned as the Prince of Renaissance. He became a real power. He gave the theory of new birth. The theories that they have given are birth. It can be translated into a revolutionary dispensation. At that time, 15th century. First they said, we are concerned with this earth and not the next thing. That is for the priest to do it. The most greatest subject is man. Man has a right to be happy. The first duty is to be happy and cause happiness to the majority of men. And they said something wonderful. Only I have understood that today. When I was reading it, before that in my whole life I had not understood it. Today I understood it. This sentence. He said, I was always wondering, what do you mean by liberal arts? I always think liberal arts. So today I read it. He said liberal, they call the arts liberal because they liberated men from the compulsions of religion and dogma and allowed man to behave as an autonomous person. It freed them, and art is equal to power. This definition nobody has heard. I have not read it anywhere. For the first time they said art means power. Art gives you the power to do and say things which religion cannot allow you to say, which politics cannot allow you to say, which any other mode of expression doesn't allow you to say. Only through art you can say those things. Therefore, they say the power of the artist. In Shakespeare's word they use the sovereignty of art. Sovereignty of art. And they say art's power of the artist is equal to the power of the gods, not God. Because they were afraid of saying that. A power of gods and the part of kings and emperors. A real artist is equal. If he is a real and genuine artist, he exercises that jurisdiction of being the sovereign by itself. And their definition of art was wonderful. They say, by a Renaissance artist, we don't mean a man who picks up the books and sits in the library and reads them and reads it to others. You cannot have art without intelligence. And once when you have intelligence, then you must create art, and art cannot go without exercising its powers. So without communicating with other people, there cannot be art. They said a Renaissance man, a humane man, they called it humanitas. A Renaissance man is he who does not sit in his house reading books, but he goes out. And only today I found wise people were so wonderful, so absolutely unlike all other people in the olden times excepting the Greco-Romans. They said humanism means that all the faculties of man should be developed in all respects. So Salutati said, I am reading you the capacity of this man, what these people meant by a modern man. Who's a modern man? Just see me for a minute. Reading is an active and aggressive pursuit. Reading is not a passive pursuit that you read it, you like it, you enjoy it, you tell somebody and sit at home. The Renaissance concept of reading is to be aggressive about it. And they said learning for the sake of learning should not be pursued. I'll read you a passage. This is a passage from Francesco Gugliardini. You'll excuse me if I write, can I read it 2-3 sentences? I, for my part, know no greater pleasure than listening to an old man of uncommon prudence speaking of public and political matters that he has not learned from books of philosophers, but from experience and action. For the latter are the only genuine methods of learning anything. So those people who have not learned much, they respect learning, but learning for the sake of learning, they hated it. And how much they respected learning? I would like to read a few sentences for that much hated and much maligned. He was a giant. He maligned many people do not know. For instance, Alauddin Khilji is a dog in our eyes. He was a very great emperor, he was a very great innovator, and he was something that we do not know. History is written by people who are on one-sided. So, Niccolo Machiavelli says, evenings I return home and enter my study, and at its entrance I take all my everyday clothes, because he is going before the court of books of great giants, so he must wear new clothes. Evenings I return home and enter my study, and at its entrance I take off my everyday clothes full of mud and dust, and don royal and courtly garments. Decorously attired, I enter into the ancient sessions of ancient men. Books are there. These are not books. This is not a library. Ancient men are sitting. It's not a book of Socrates. Socrates himself is sitting. That's a Ba Mulaza, Ba Adab Hoshiyar. Received amicably by them, I partake of such food as is mine only, because they are great men and I cannot take their food, and to which I was born. There, without shame, I speak with them and ask them about the reason for their actions, and they, in their humanity, respond to them. Reading and learning is not a passive thing according to the humanists. It is an active thing. Now what kind of men they were? Alberti was a painter, was a classicist, he was a poet, he was a scientist, he was a mathematician, and now listen, he was a horseman, Shaswar. They said even body should be there, you should be excellent in body, and he was also athlete. They did not have this kind of specialization. Even the pygmies are created, they do one thing. I am talking about operation of one hand and other things. Karl Marx said 18th century demanded giants like Himalayan giants, and it got them. And he counted Leonardo da Vinci among them. And what is Leonardo da Vinci? Art, science, music, invention, and writing, and many others. All of them. 10, 12 capabilities. And what was this Machiavelli, what was he? He was a statesman, he was a prime minister, he was a strategist, science, he has written the book on art of war. Then he was a dramatist, comedian. Then he was a writer of other things, and he has written the Prince. So you will find that some 5 centuries back, people were talking about literature and art in the same way that today some of us are talking. About literature and art should be a weapon in the hands of the oppressed people, ordinary people. The learned majority will do nothing very useless. That learning is actually not wanted. This is what they said 500 years back. This is what Shakespeare said at the time, Marlowe, Shakespeare, all these people. They learned not for the sake of showing off their intelligence, but for the sake of using it for changing. They said, we don't have much time to go into the details of it. They said, art should not be for an individual, it should be for the entire state. That power which is created by art should be bestowed upon the people, all of them. An artist worth his name cannot be considered a recluse who does not, he has said, and Sartre says, in the very broader meaning, it was absolutely political. Their interpretation of art was in the broadest sense taking part in the good and well-being of the people. And therefore, their interpretation of art, Impressionism, this and this, someday we'll be talking about how art was taken back from the pinnacles of glory and greatness, and the art produced at that time. You read Boccaccio, you read the droll stories of, I read them when I was in Madrid. It is written, a faint-hearted, in those days on the book it was written, faint-hearted people, young damsels should not read the book. But he was so great a satirist, and that was most of them was about the nawabs, about the mullahs, about the priests and all that. These people, with their pains, destroyed to smithereens the hypocrisy of 1,000 years. All the bomb, all the falsehood, all the misguidance, all the clap-trap of the emperors and his excellencies and all that, with their few sentences, they made people laugh at them. They made them laughable, useless. If you read the Frenchmen, especially these Rabelais droll stories, you must read them, and Boccaccio, they are enough to make you laugh at them and regard them as stubborn people, useless people. If by reading something you take away the fear from the hearts of people, what is the greatest job of an artist? To take away the fear. Fear is the greatest enemy of art, of freedom, of humanity, of humanitas. Hidden fear. This is not good. This will be recorded. This is not. This is the fear that is sitting in the heart of every one of us. That's why Latouche, by praising Pinu, has said that one of the greatest things done by Pinu was to take away the fear from the hearts of girls. Which we did not have in China. People like Petrarch didn't come and they didn't lift their heads and say, come what may, we challenge you. Only these people of Italy first, and then Netherlands, and then very later on more, Sir Thomas More, and then Shakespeare, and then later on other people. Whole of Europe was united, things were completely swept away. And up to that period, all the claptrap that was there and all the reactionary things that had collected over Europe was liberated, capitalism was given a chance, people came together, new learning and new university was founded, and people were given a liberty, the like of which the world had never seen. Thank you. Would you say a little louder, please? Would you please come here, so that everybody may listen to your question?
You say you consider George Person as the greatest man who crossed the boundaries and limits of the age. And you also consider the Greek nation as the most civilized nation of the world. But Greek literature gave the lesson of humility and reverence. So how do you balance your arguments? How do you balance your arguments? You consider George Person as the greatest person who crossed the boundaries and limits or the restrictions of the age. And you also consider the Greek nation as the most oldest civilized nation of the world. But Greek literature gave us the lesson of humility and reverence. Humility and reverence. Reverence. So how do you balance your arguments in this life?
I would say, precision is not our strong point. I don't say that everyone who crosses the limits of his age is doing something good. There are certain limits of the times which should be obeyed and which should be done. This is a matter of decision and intelligence and one's wisdom. But so far as the Greeks are concerned, I have yet to see the humility, the only humility in the Greeks. You should read more Greeks. They are daring, For instance, even the epics of Homer, you look at the training that they are thinking, the way that they are thinking, and if you read Euripides, you will find that he is storming the heavens. There were many European Greeks which said there is no God, and they were completely challenged. You find at least two philosophers who said gods are not there. And Euripides was the man who was always playing mischief with the gods. And the entire Greek mythology is a very mischief way of only Umar Khayyam can compete with them. Nobody else can. Umar Khayyam has said, Man bad kunam wa tubad makafa dahi, paspat mayani man wa tuchist bedo. If I do something bad, and you return badness to me, and punish me for it, then I also do like this. Anybody who slaps me, I slap him. So why are you a God, and why I am not a God? We both do the same thing. If somebody does bad, we punish him. You also punish, I also punish. So what is the distinction about you?
Then what was the next reformation?
Very good question. I again repeat, precision is not our strongest point. I submitted earlier that many systems coexist. I specifically said that while Renaissance was going about, conflict, Reformation was also there, Reformation was also there. These tribal people were also sitting there, we were also sitting there, Baruch, Marivari were also there, the whole world was going on. Renaissance was not controlling the whole world. Renaissance was controlling some very important features of it, but we never say, nobody can say that the whole world can be controlled. Even now, today, this the present estimation of globalization, is globalization controlling category? No. Africa? No. So we have at the habit of saying all. Forget about the word all. There is no all in the south. There are always exceptions, only you can say to this extent, to this extent, to this extent. And many things coexist, and many contrary things exist. Yes. Yes, sir. So, my question is that, what was the difference between thoughts, we can say, the theory of Erasmus and Petrarch, and there is a treaty in the Northern Renaissance, we can say. So that is the treaty of Lodi. What is the role of that treaty? And there was treaty, Lodi treaty, in the Northern Renaissance, you can say in France. So, and another point of my question is that, so Lodi treaty is between Italy and France, but I am not clear about that treaty. Yes, sir. And it was, I think, in 1454. So that was treaty. And so it said that Shakespeare, Milton, and Savintur Savadra did not get the influence of this Reformation, or we can say Renaissance. They did not get influence, and they created a new. So how can we say that they didn't take that influence? And third point of my question is that Michelangelo and Aristo, these were the people in the creative, we can say cultural creativity. And that was the role of others who were also present in this creativity of culture, means creativity in the sense of architecture, painting, literature, letters or art. Thank you. Thank you. About Lodi, when you tell me what is Lodi, we will talk about it. As for the others that you said that they are not influenced, I would like to know where it is written by anybody that they are not influenced. But it always is a matter of opinion. For instance, there is something, Adhan. What do we mean by influencing? Influencing means catching a man by the throat and he should do everything that I have done? No. Are we influenced by Charity in that manner? That whatever we are doing, because we are influenced by him, we are doing as Charity was doing. Because we are influenced by Holy Prophet, we are doing everything as he was doing. We are always saying Kalmu la ilaha illallah Muslim. But are we doing exactly what he is doing? Influencing doesn't mean copy to copy, makhi to makhi. even if you do not know somebody, but still you are being influenced. So therefore influence is a very ephemeral, a very delicate thing. Nobody can decide whether I am being influenced by him or not. In any case, when there are great movements, when I am saying about it, do you think that it's possible for me to agree with what those gentlemen said? I may differ. Do we mean to say that I agree with all the things that Plato was saying? We don't. Influencing means that we get some information and stand there, we look at it, then in Arabia they say, Khuzma, Safa, Da'ma, Qadra, take that which is acceptable and leave that is not acceptable. So we get all those things which we have, then we forget about them, then another movement comes. Movements after movements come. There's no movement on earth which alone is the fountainhead of all knowledge. This earth goes on begetting. This is just like these waves of the sea. One wave comes, then another wave comes, then third waves come. All these waves comes, but some waves are more powerful than others. It is not necessary for them that the whole world should agree with every word of this thing. This is absolutely ridiculous. Nobody can agree with him on anything. But their influence, their impression, their result cannot be denied. That is the main thing. In what way? How can there be a difference between theories when they believe in humanity? But you can ask me, for instance, what is the difference between Sachal and Ruhal? Can you explain it in 2 words? What is the difference between Ruhal and Sachal? Ultimate triumph. That's an opinion of somebody, and please remember that I am not bound to agree with the opinions of all these gentlemen who have started writing today. We are students of world culture and world literature. So every time they can hear if you write a thing and you hold me responsible for his opinions, I will not be responsible, and I will not give that much weight to the opinion of a man as you think it's due to him.
Sir, you consider the reading of art and literature as the main motivating force of literature. This is what triggered the Renaissance, of the triggering of the Renaissance. It was there actually getting motivated by when these translations were discovered in Rome and Italy and Spain and other Arab world. But then you did not include all the other influences that were there, because what I believe that it was not the only motivating force that actually triggered the Renaissance. Because Renaissance was a moment there were certain other scientific discoveries, science was also taking place, and there were certain inventions. Do you agree if you could say that there were other motivating influences along with that discovery of literature and art? I do you think, I have the opinion that it was the only influence that actually initiated the Renaissance, either in our Rome or Italy.
What I like more is to have a dialogue. That is more enjoyable. For instance, I am interested whether you considered any difference between main and only difference, only force, main force and only force. Did I use the word only or did I use the main force? And if it was the main force, then it does not exclude other forces. But if I said the only force, then I naturally exclude it. Can you recall whether I said main force or I said the only force? Many, law, anything. And with regard to the scientific discoveries, they came later on. Only this thing has to be corrected, your statement should be corrected. But the main scientific discoveries came subsequent to the Renaissance. Kepler, would you like to come here? Nobody is understanding what is the argument about. Please. Let everybody benefit from what you are saying. So that it will become easier.
Now, what I say that in 1476, England saw the invention of setting up a printing press by Caxton, and it actually gave widespread circulation to the study of Bible, because it was known that only Christians, each and every commoner had an access to the study of religion, to the study of the Bible, because otherwise Bible was monopolized by the church and by a few bunch of priests. Only they had an access, and they could interpret the message of God in any way they liked, and most of it was distorted, disfigured, and de-shaped, we can say. But then, when after the invention of printing press and setting up a printing press, it was widely circulated. And the other factor, that was the efforts of William Tyndale and Coverdale. And I must tell, with your permission, to all of the audience here, that William Tyndale, it cost him his life. He was not alive because of bringing about the translation of the Bible into vernacular. I just wanted to know why didn't actually you mention all these influences that were there, along with the force of art. Naturally, art is the basic motivating force. It is which actually transforms the minds of man and revolutionizes the minds of man, and they go for these emotions. But these influences are there. Would you kindly dilate upon it? And I do confess that you did not mention any word like only or something. That's right.
You see, the influences that are upon men could be counted not in hundreds but thousands. If you itemize everything, then would you be able to sit? I am prepared to go the entire catalogue. But would the ladies sit, and is it the essential part of a lecture to itemize every little thing? For instance, translation of the Bible, broadly Bible, but did it introduce any new element of thought? That Bible was brought to the excess. That is the argument of the church. For the church man, it may be a very good thing that all people can understand it. But is it the argument of the old Greco-Roman civilization, the grandeur, the mastery over nature of man? This Bible, which stands on the bedrock of the fallacy of man and his being a sinner from birth, is this going, the majority, going to the aid of the non-humility of the people, understanding of the people, daring of the people, self-confidence of the people? Is it going to make them more meek and more weak and more obedient, or make it more important, powerful? One. Then if you go to the idioms, what about the books that were translated? What about Ibn Rushd? What happened about the Muslims that were doing it? What was the Renaissance, and what happened to the priests that were there? What happened after Martin Luther King? What happened after that? What happened? It's a long story. We have a habit of saying that everything is said. It's possible to mention everything in one lecture. If we started, then we'll stop nowhere. I assure you that we can start from, so I can go on at least for 3-4 days continuously I can go on. But would it be advisable?
As the first invention came in the Asia, in Iraq or Iran, and we have great scholars of the world as Muslim scientists and others so many. And then came in the Europe, but here we have discussed the European Renaissance. What is behind this data? We haven't got something too much in the compare of European Renaissance as in the came in the Asia. What is behind this?
At the time when Renaissance came in India, Pakistan, in this place, the powers, ruling class was not as weak as in Christendom. The most powerful man was Pope. There were no emperors, what's the name, they were not that powerful. Here Abbasi Caliphate was all powerful, and the mullahs were all powerful, more powerful in many cases. Imam Hanbal was a great enemy of the movement that was there about based on reason. Many people, Mansur Halaj was your man. He was burnt at the stake. This entire Mansur ho Khuda ke chain, it was not that. It was anti-reformism movement, anti-reason movement. That was the reaction, counter-reformation. And that is a long, long story of the counter-reformation in Pakistan. Hundreds of people were killed and murdered. And that is a long story. This will not be included in this lecture. Someday we should talk about this reformation. I am very glad that this question has been asked. We should think about what happened to our reformers, our great men, our patriarchs. Our patriarch, for instance, was Ibn Rushd, Averroes. Because he wrote all these books and translated, he was taken from the place where he was living and thrown and made to live with the Jews. They said, you are a Jew. Then after many years he was brought and made to stand before a mosque, and people of the mosque were told to spit upon his face. So those hundreds of people came out of the mosque, spit upon his face because he was a scientist, because he was a man of freedom. They spit upon him. He caught pneumonia because of that spitting, which went on for hours and hours, and he died. So someday somebody should have the courage to find out what happened to our men, whom जो तारीख राहों में मारे गए. किसको शिकवा है दर शौक के सिलसिले हिजर की कत्लगाहों में सब्जा मिले, कत्लगाहों से चुनकर हमारे अलम और निकलेंगे उस शौक के काफिले जिनकी राह तलब से हमारे कदम कर चुके दर्द के फासले.
So, would you please define when you said that the world's most ancient civilization is Iran's? What we have learned, and through reliable sources we have learned that the most ancient civilization is Mohenjo-daro's. Can you define this? Explain this.
I never said that the most ancient civilization was Iran. I said Iraq. There's a difference between Iraq and Iraq. So let us be precise. Mohenjo-daro came later on. Mohenjo-daro is not the only place. Mohenjo-daro is a part of a chain of sentence which are Harappan civilization. The same kind of cities come here. It is there in Kashavar. It was a phenomenon that is there in the entire thing here. It's a later thing. According to the authorities, it's a later phenomenon. The first city of Sus was in Iraq, not in Mohenjo-daro. Mohenjo-daro comes a little later.
Since you said feel easy, and I venture to ask a question. Sir, you said Alauddin Khilji was a great man. So could you tell the fact about that one, since it is considered as a negative character, and in most of the books most people consider it as a negative character. Could you please tell us about Alauddin Khilji? Thank you.
Alauddin Khilji was the first man who introduced state commerce. What he did was, there used to be famines in India, and he from the royal treasury paid money to the traders as his state representatives. State trade. He was the first man who introduced state trade. He sent them to go and purchase things from me, and I will give you your reward, but we will sell it at the price at which we have purchased. So he made everything cheap. That was his way. State involvement, the money was lying at the treasury uselessly. He used it. He got cheap things from places, far off places, so that in the areas concerned, the commodities came down. One, he introduced